Just after midnight on November 7, 1943, the dark waters off Bougainville rippled under the engines of Japanese destroyers, moving silently towards Cinema Bay. Aboard them were nearly 500 soldiers from the 53rd Infantry Regiment, men tasked with executing what their commanders believed would be a decisive blow. Their orders were clear: land behind the American beachhead, set up a blocking position, and crush the Marines between two converging forces. Every element of Japanese doctrine predicted success: darkness, surprise, and numerical advantage. At 0015 hours, Major James Wilson received the radio call in his forward command post. The voice on the line was calm but insistent. Japanese landing craft had touched down 3 miles behind the main perimeter near Koromokina Lagoon. Wilson set his coffee aside and bent over the map spread across the field table. Red pins showed the positions of the 3rd and 9th Marine Regiments. Blue arrows marked likely Japanese avenues of approach. He reached for another marker and drew a fresh line, this one showing an unexpected landing in their rear. Lieutenant Colonel Joseph McCaffrey burst into the tent, still covered in Bougainville's red clay. "Major, the 12th Marines confirm at least 12 barges. Maybe 15. They're unloading now." Wilson nodded grimly, already calculating artillery response times. The Japanese had chosen their beach well. Coral reefs shielded it from large ships but made it ideal for shallow draft landing craft. What they didn't know was that marine defenses had evolved far beyond what Tokyo's planners imagined. Months of preparation had created a network of overlapping fire zones and rapid response artillery, capable of shifting fire in minutes, not hours. The Marines had already rehearsed scenarios just like this one. When the first shells from the 12th Marines' 75mm pack howitzers whistled down onto the beach, the Japanese soldiers were still forming ranks. Through binoculars, Sergeant Herbert Thomas watched explosions tear through barges and scatter men into the surf. The heavier 90mm coastal defense guns joined the bombardment, their rounds turning the landing zone into chaos. Japanese intelligence had failed. American listening posts had tracked the destroyers hours earlier, and spotters along the coast had watched the barges drift toward shore. When the first enemy boots hit sand, pre-sighted artillery zones were already raining steel. What was meant to be a flawless infiltration had turned instantly into a nightmare, one that would soon become a textbook lesson in how modern marine coordination could turn an ambush inside out. Captain Isamu Akamatsu led the first wave of Japanese infantry through the jungle inland from the blasted shoreline. His men, disciplined and silent, moved in small formations under the moon-filtered canopy. They had trained exhaustively for night operations, certain that stealth and close combat would win the day. Yet, within minutes of entering the dense terrain, that confidence began to unravel. The Americans seemed to anticipate every move. Trip flares ignited at exactly the wrong moments, exposing entire squads in blinding white light. Machine gun nests lay in perfect arcs of overlapping fire, cutting down those who tried to advance. Every trail the Japanese scouts believed secret was already covered by interlocking fields of fire. The Marines were not reacting. They were waiting. Private First Class Robert Carter, crouched behind a fallen tree, steadied his M1919 machine gun on a narrow path that intelligence had marked as a likely infiltration route. He didn't fire when the first shapes emerged from the foliage. He waited until the entire patrol walked into his kill zone, then pressed the trigger. The bursts of .30 caliber fire shredded the jungle and sent survivors diving for cover that didn't exist. Meanwhile, Major Wilson sat over his radio, coordinating a web of defense that stretched across the entire sector. Every forward observer, every gun battery, every squad leader fed him real-time reports. Japanese signals, by contrast, were chaotic. Runners cut down in the open, radio sets jammed by the Americans, and field officers forced to shout orders over the roar of artillery. By 0200 hours, the Japanese assault had lost cohesion. Units that should have been advancing in concert were pinned or wiped out piecemeal. The jungle that was supposed to conceal them became a trap illuminated by muzzle flashes and the harsh glare of flares. Akamatsu's men pressed forward regardless, driven by duty and desperation, but they were walking straight into the jaws of an army that had already mapped every inch of the terrain. As the fighting intensified, Sergeant Thomas's squad pushed toward the inner perimeter to reinforce a machine gun team under pressure. The air reeked of cordite and burning vegetation. Tracer rounds cut through the darkness like molten threads. When shrapnel from a grenade tore through his arm, Thomas refused evacuation. "Keep firing," he barked, waving his good hand toward the enemy positions. His calm presence steadied the men around him, even as the jungle erupted with incoming mortar fire. By 0400 hours, what was meant to be a brilliant flanking attack had devolved into slaughter. Cut off from the beach, surrounded by perfectly synchronized marine fire, Akamatsu's force was trapped in the very pocket they had hoped to create. The battle for Bougainville was only hours old, but the outcome was already being decided. Dawn crept slowly over Bougainville, filtering through the jungle mist and revealing the grim reality of the night's battle. The once disciplined columns of Japanese infantry were now scattered groups of exhausted men, crawling through the mud, hunted by artillery and machine gun fire. The plan that had promised swift victory had become a death trap. Sergeant Thomas, his arm bandaged but still bleeding, positioned his squad along a ridge commanding the approaches to the marine perimeter. He knew the Japanese would try to regroup and strike again at first light. Beneath the canopy, the sounds of movement carried faintly, boots dragging, rifles clattering, the whispered shouts of officers trying to rally what was left of their units. Thomas gave quiet orders. "Hold your fire until they're in the open." Below the ridge, Japanese infiltrators used a narrow streambed to edge forward, thinking it would conceal their approach. But Marine observers were already watching. When the enemy crept into range, Thomas's men opened up with coordinated fire, forcing the attackers back into a clearing where artillery was waiting. Within moments, the 12th Marines' 75mm pack howitzers thundered again, their shells walking across the valley floor with chilling precision. Major Wilson directed the engagement from his command post, his map now littered with new annotations. The Marines had rehearsed for exactly this kind of multi-directional attack, and Wilson's calm, methodical control kept the entire defense synchronized. When scouts reported Japanese activity near Grid 174, firing data was already prepared. Within minutes, heavy rounds were landing exactly where they were needed. The Japanese tried again and again to regroup, but their communication had collapsed. Radios were destroyed, officers dead or isolated, and runners cut down before they could relay messages. What had once been a formidable infantry battalion was now a series of disconnected clusters, each unaware of the other's positions. In contrast, the Marine network functioned like a living organism. Every rifle squad had radio contact with its company command, and every company could call for immediate artillery support. The Americans' combined arms doctrine, integrating infantry, artillery, and communications, was operating flawlessly. Captain Akamatsu, grim-faced and bloodied, gathered about 40 surviving soldiers and attempted a desperate final charge, believing he faced only a small American outpost. The moment they emerged from the brush, Carter's machine gun opened up. The ground churned under bursts of .30 caliber fire, cutting the lead ranks down. Those who dove for cover found themselves in a shallow depression, one that had already been marked as target reference .7. Within half a minute, mortar shells rained down, erasing what remained of the charge. By sunrise, the jungle had fallen eerily quiet. The Japanese rear attack was effectively broken. What had been conceived as a masterstroke of strategy was now a monument to the precision, discipline, and adaptability of the United States Marines. The sun rose on November 8, 1943, over a battlefield shrouded in smoke and silence. The jungle near Koromokina Lagoon was strewn with shell craters, shattered trees, and the twisted remnants of landing barges that had carried the 53rd Infantry to its doom. For the surviving Japanese soldiers, there was no front line, only chaos. Isolated squads hid among the roots and coral outcroppings, cut off from command and terrified to move under the ever-present hum of Marine aircraft overhead. Sergeant Herbert Thomas moved through the early light like a man born for the terrain. His squad advanced cautiously, leapfrogging from cover to cover, securing ground the artillery had pounded hours earlier. When a machine gun nest opened fire from a thicket ahead, Thomas didn't order a frontal assault. Instead, he used his radio to call in a precision strike. Minutes later, 75mm shells obliterated the position. It was a glimpse of the new American doctrine, less about charging heroically, more about thinking, coordinating, and annihilating with superior firepower. By mid-morning, Major Wilson's command post was buzzing with reports. The Japanese flanking force had been reduced to less than 100 effective men. Wilson, methodical as ever, checked his field phone lines, ensuring every company was still connected. His system was working exactly as intended, each Marine position able to summon artillery or air support faster than any previous generation of soldier. The Japanese, still relying on runners and flag signals, were fighting a war that had already left them behind. Private Carter and his gun team repositioned their M1919 to cover a new valley approach. Their barrel had burned hot through the night, 800 rounds fired, and not a single malfunction. Now they watched through the haze as Marine patrols advanced methodically, calling out coordinates to the 12th Marines for fire correction. Mortar teams worked seamlessly with machine gun crews, every movement executed like clockwork. The surviving Japanese troops fought bravely but without hope. Many had exhausted their ammunition or lost their officers. The once proud 53rd Infantry, trained for lightning assaults and night infiltration, was reduced to scattered groups dying alone in the mud. Marine snipers and artillery observers picked off any who tried to flee toward the beach. By noon, the area that had once teemed with enemy soldiers had gone still except for the occasional crack of a rifle or the thud of an artillery shell striking its mark. What was meant to be the annihilation of an American beachhead had turned into the complete collapse of a Japanese battalion. The Marines had achieved victory not through overwhelming numbers, but through precision, coordination, and the confidence born from hard-won experience. Bougainville had just witnessed a turning point, a demonstration of modern warfare that would echo across the Pacific. By the evening of November 8th, organized Japanese resistance had ceased entirely. Patrols from the 3rd Marine Division swept the jungle methodically, advancing in tight formations under the cover of artillery and machine gun support. What they found was devastation. A battlefield littered with broken rifles, abandoned packs, and the bodies of men who had fought to the last round. The jungle that had once concealed the enemy was now an open graveyard. M1917 light tanks from the 3rd Tank Battalion rumbled forward to assist in the final mopping-up operations. Their 37mm guns and twin machine guns shredded any lingering opposition hiding in coral caves or ravines. The tanks moved with surprising agility through the undergrowth, their tracks grinding over roots and debris. Behind them, Marines followed, tossing grenades into dugouts and marking safe sectors with white smoke. Each advance was deliberate, efficient, and merciless. Sergeant Thomas coordinated closely with combat engineers, who were using shaped charges to seal off the caves where Japanese soldiers had taken refuge. The natural coral formations that had offered excellent protection from rifle fire became tombs once explosives detonated at the entrances. No more surprises, Thomas muttered as his squad set up a defensive perimeter around the engineer's position. He moved with a steady determination despite his injuries, his leadership keeping morale high even in the face of grim work. Overhead, Corsair fighters from the 7th Squadron streaked low across the canopy. They were called in to strike targets identified by ground observers. Smoke grenades marked enemy hideouts, and within moments, rockets and 500-pound bombs tore through the jungle with pinpoint precision. These airstrikes demonstrated just how refined American coordination had become. Pilots, artillerymen, and infantrymen all operated as parts of a single lethal system. When Major Wilson established his forward command post in a captured Japanese position, he examined the documents strewn across the makeshift headquarters. There were maps marked in red pencil showing marine lines, supply dumps, and even communication routes. The Japanese had planned thoroughly. They'd brought ammunition and rations for a week of sustained combat. Everything indicated confidence in a swift victory. But their assumptions had been fatally flawed. They had underestimated the Americans' ability to adapt and coordinate in real time. By dusk, the Marines had counted more than 370 enemy dead. Fewer than 20 prisoners were taken alive, most of them too wounded to resist. The contrast in losses told the story clearly. Only 17 Marines killed and 32 wounded. What had been intended as a masterstroke of Japanese strategy had instead become proof of how far American combat doctrine had evolved. Bougainville had become more than a battlefield. It had become a proving ground for the future of warfare. By November 9th, the battle was over, but the echoes of gunfire still hung heavy in the humid air. Marine patrols continued sweeping the area, ensuring no isolated pockets of resistance remained. The few surviving Japanese soldiers, hungry, wounded, and leaderless, emerged from the jungle like ghosts. Most had no ammunition left, and many carried nothing but bayonets or empty rifles. The flanking force that had set out to crush the Marines now existed only in fragments, its destruction total and undeniable. Sergeant Herbert Thomas supervised the final clearing operations with quiet authority. His left arm was heavily bandaged, but he refused evacuation. "Plenty of work left," he told the corpsmen. His squad methodically checked coral caves and ravines, covering engineers as they used flamethrowers and explosives to destroy any remaining strongholds. The work was slow and dangerous. One careless step could trigger a hidden grenade or booby trap, but the Marines moved with the precision of men who trusted one another completely. Major Wilson's headquarters had shifted forward into a former Japanese position. He studied captured documents that revealed the full scope of the enemy plan. Detailed intelligence on marine defenses, supply routes, and artillery locations. The Japanese had clearly expected a static defense, one that could be easily outflanked and overwhelmed before sunrise. Instead, they had encountered a flexible, coordinated system. Every Marine position tied into a communications network capable of summoning devastating firepower within minutes. Military intelligence officers noted how revolutionary this engagement had been. The Japanese had relied on decades of traditional infantry doctrine, shock, infiltration, and night assault, against an opponent who had embraced the new era of combined arms warfare. Radio coordination, pre-registered artillery, mobile defense, and integrated air support had rendered those old tactics obsolete overnight. As reports flowed in, the casualty figures confirmed the extent of the victory. 377 Japanese dead, 17 Marines killed. The exchange ratio was staggering. Historians would later call it one of the most decisive defensive actions of the entire Pacific campaign. For the Japanese, Bougainville was a devastating revelation. That courage and numbers meant little against coordination, technology, and doctrine refined through experience. On November 11th, the beachhead was calm again. Graves registration teams worked quietly, marking and burying the fallen with care. Wilson and Thomas stood together on the ridge that had anchored the Marine defense, surveying a landscape now stripped bare by artillery fire. The jungle was gone, replaced by cratered earth, twisted metal, and silence. Wilson finally spoke. "They thought they could surprise us," he said almost to himself, "but we've learned too much for that." What began as an attempted ambush had ended as a turning point in the evolution of modern warfare. The Battle of Bougainville had proven beyond doubt that the United States Marines no longer merely reacted to war, they defined it.